Oh my God, what the f? Oh, they really hopping out. Oh, that's real. They really coming to your trenches and jumping out and bagging your ass, bro. They ain't all type of boy. What the f?
One of the things that we have seen over and over from the president, from his team, Stephen Miller saying it's like Baghdad in Ethiopia. They seem to hold their harshest criticism sometimes for cities that are majority black and brown.
The right answer is, I just know that when we go to CNN in Washington and do a show, they send guards out with us to walk us out 200 feet to the street, and they don't do that for our.
Well, they don't do it for me.
Yeah, right.
They don't do it for me.
No reason at all.
They might do it for me. They might do it for some of y'all who need.
They do it for everybody.
So the answer is for the feds to take over DC. That's the answer?
It is a federal. I'm in DC.
All right, well, today I want to discuss the plan by President Trump to initiate a federal takeover of Washington, D.C. At least that's what liberals are calling it. It's worth noting that's not exactly what is happening here. Although I have to say, I would not entirely even be opposed to that idea. After all, that is quite literally what our founding fathers and Constitution intended. DC was always supposed to be a federal district under federal control, but we'll talk about that later. What I first of all want to point out is that that's not exactly what is happening here. Rather, what Trump is doing is deploying federal law enforcement, think here FBI, DHS, and ATF, to essentially help police the streets of DC to stop the rising crime problem after, if you have not noticed, Mayor Muriel Bowser and local Democrat leadership in the district are refusing to do so, and hence this has triggered, of course, as you could imagine, a massive liberal meltdown. Although it's worth noting, even some folks over at MSNBC, like Joe Scarborough, are kind of softcore defending Trump here. They're actually noting that, yes, there is indeed a massive crime and public safety problem in our district. Maybe it's not the worst idea, but he obviously does not speak for most Democrats. They want to be hysterical about everything. And not only, guys, are they referring to this as an insane authoritarian move, even though it's really not, they're going so far as to refer to it as racist. Because, of course, if you want to clean up a very real and serious crime problem, if you want to make these cities of our nation safer for ordinary residents and families to be, that is, of course, it must be a white supremacist dog whistle. We'll talk about that here today, as well as the new details, because apparently as of tonight, Sunday night, August 10th, it is now official. You have indeed federal law enforcement being deployed on the streets of DC. This is very real. President Trump is set to do a press conference on this on Monday morning, and we'll tell you all about it. So folks, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Subscribing, guys, is not only the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, it's worth probably starting here, discussing what happened earlier last week that kind of triggered a lot of the controversy and hence this move, although it was brewing for several months now, where essentially you had none other than Big Balls. Remember Big Balls, the DOGE staffer, was beaten pretty badly in Washington, D.C. after he tried to save a woman, a single woman, from a carjacking, and essentially it started this whole physical altercation. Now, it's worth noting a couple things. First of all, we are praying, obviously, for Big Balls' speedy recovery. He's definitely living up to the name there. But I'd also, first of all, just want to point out that, this is a DOGE staffer, right? This is the very type of person that the mainstream media was trying to ruthlessly slander as being, they said this about basically all of them, right? There are these just uppity, like bratty kids who are going in here and just trying to fire people and ruin people's lives. They're so terrible. And then in reality, it turns out these are the type of people you had working for DOGE, right? People who are serving their communities, patriotic citizens. They're brave, they're masculine, they're willing to stand up and help people in need. Yeah, that's exactly, of course, very telling. But with that said, President Trump did indeed send out a message to this guy saying, Edward, the crime situation in Washington, just like our southern border where 0 illegals entered in the last 3 months, will be a safe place very soon. Thank you for your bravery and your heart. Stay tuned. And here's President Trump, of course, acknowledging what happened.
By the way, I have to say that somebody from DOGE was very badly hurt last night. You saw that. A young man who was beat up by a bunch of thugs in D.C. And either they're going to straighten their act out in the terms of government and in terms of protection, or we're going to have to federalize and run it the way it's supposed to be run.
Now, what's important to understand, if it hasn't already been spelled out, is that what happened to Big Balls is far from an isolated incident. In fact, it was, I believe, back in the month of June where a young 21-year-old congressional staffer was killed incidentally in a shooting in DC, right? Not even that he was targeted, but basically just random gang violence happening right in the middle of our city. And, you know, I know you guys who have been to DC in the past few years, you know, there's a massive homelessness problem. It's not exactly always the safest place to be. And President Trump has been calling out this issue for several months now, except the problem, as newly appointed and confirmed Judge Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney for DC, has noted, in that district, despite the fact that it should be under federal control, which we'll talk about here in a second, they of course are practicing these very radical and insane so-called criminal justice reform policies that are allowing repeat offenders and many of these violent thugs to run back out into the streets, hence why you're seeing more of the violence, and hence why it's no longer something that's just being refined to certain neighborhoods. You have congressional staffers getting killed, you have DOGE staffers being beat up. This is a massive problem, and of course, DC has been doing nothing, or I wouldn't say nothing actually, they've been actually abetting and condoning what is happening, which has sparked, of course, a massive battle with the administration, because Trump is essentially saying, we're not going to take this.
This young kid who worked at the White House was beaten to a pulp. He's got a broken nose. He's got a severe concussion. He's battered all over his head, okay, by a gang of punks. 10 of them, I believe. 2 have been arrested, 2 15-year-olds. None of them come to my office, Laura, because they're not considered criminals. They go to family court where the effort is rehabilitation. The D.C. Council, and the president is right, they've got to stop their coddling. Number one, we've got to lower the age of responsibility to 14. I'm tired of having these kids commit crimes in their crews, not gangs in D.C. We've got an intern, you said it in your open. He's an intern from college. He gets shot going out for McDonald's at 10:30 at night. This kid is trying to help his girlfriend or his friend to a car. He gets assaulted, and but for a cop going by, they would have, had they gotten him on the ground, they would have stopped him and finished him. He was able to stay standing. This has to end. The council has this Youth Incarceration Act where we had a guy who shot a kid on a bus, not justified, with an illegal gun. You know what the sentence was? Probation. The judge said go to college. Okay? He took an illegal gun. He should be jailed for the illegal gun. Forget about the shooting. You put that on top of the gun. Then what we've got are kids who are out there who are making fun of all of this, doing carjackings, and I can't touch them because they want to protect them.
They know that, and that's why they travel in gangs.
They do know that.
And the older kids send out the younger kids to do the real dirty work because they know they're fine.
They absolutely understand. And youth violence is on the rise, not just in D.C., but across the country. And if you think that these kids need to be coddled and they need to be hugged, they need to have consequences. They need to understand that enough is enough, that we're going to put them in jail or some kind of youth rehabilitation detention facility and not allow the D.C. Council, one of whom I just recently indicted, to take cover for these kids. It's time to end it. That's what the president wants. That's what we're going to do.
Look at what worked in New York City when Giuliani was mayor. He went after the small crimes, which led to reducing
quality
the big
of life.
crimes. So the quality of life. So people defecating in the streets, blocks from the Capitol, which I saw the other day. That was lovely. The tents on K Street, the tents under the tunnels over here. And they cleared up some of those out in front of Union Station. But it's horrific. This is the nation's capital.
Exactly.
And all over the United States, we have a similar story told. St. Louis, we've still seen blight
everywhere.
They want D.C. now to be Baltimore.
Well, here's the thing. D.C. is the nation's capital. People come here for pride and patriotism, not to get assaulted, carjacked, or shot, get caught in the crossfire like a young kid did last month.
Judge.
Yeah, well, I think you get the picture as to what is going on right now. You have these insane criminals, many of them teenagers, basically, again, being abetted by the local city government and their bail reform laws and the soft on crime policies and all of this. And it's worth noting on the front of President Trump, that this is far from a knee-jerk reaction. He has been floating this for months. He has been telling DC to get its crime problem together, but it does appear that the Big Balls incident, I know it sounds funny, but it is true. The Big Balls incident is indeed it is the straw that broke the camel's back, because ever since then, President Trump has been fully committed and fully serious about this idea of, well, DC, if you're not going to clean up your act, if you're not going to do something about crime, then the feds are going to do it for you. We're going to start deploying federal law enforcement and basically starting the process here of re-federalizing the district. Take a listen to what President Trump said earlier this week, and then we will show you since what has happened now. He was completely serious about this. I guess you could call it threat. I prefer the word warning in this case, but take a listen.
That had anything to do with it, but we've had very productive talks today. Yes, ma'am?
President Trump, on federalizing D.C., are you considering taking over the D.C. police? Is that an option on the table?
We're considering it, yeah, because the crime is ridiculous. I could show you a chart comparing D.C. to other locations, and you're not going to want to see what it looks like. It was just up on television, actually. They were showing it. Now, we want to have a great, safe capital, and we're going to have it. And that includes cleanliness, and it includes other things. We have a capital that's very unsafe. You know, we just almost lost a young man, beautiful, handsome guy that got the hell knocked out of him the night before last. And I'm going to call him now. We wanted to give him a little recovery time. We just put a call into him. They're calling back in a little while, but he went through a bad situation, to put it mildly, and there's too much of it. We're gonna do something about it. So whether you call it federalized or what, and that also includes the graffiti that you see, the papers all over the place, the roads that are in bad shape, the medians that are falling down, the median in between roads that's falling down. We're going to beautify the city. We're going to make it beautiful. And what a shame. The rate of crime, the rate of muggings, killings, and everything else, we're not going to let it. And that includes bringing in the National Guard, maybe very quickly, too.
And with that said, Trump has now moved forward with these threats, as he just put out today on Truth Social. Quote, "We're having a news conference tomorrow in the White House. I'm going to make our Capitol safer and more beautiful than it was ever before. The homeless have to move out immediately. We will give you places to stay, but far from the Capitol. The criminals, you don't have to move out. We're going to put you in jail where you belong. It's going to happen very fast, just like the border. We went from millions of people pouring in to zero the last few months. This will be easier. Be prepared. There will be no more Mr. Nice Guy. We want our Capitol back. Thank you for your attention to this matter." And with that said, we also have the confirmation here tonight that indeed this was not bluffing. Over the weekend, various federal law enforcement agencies were indeed deployed to the streets of DC. This is a very real thing that is happening. We don't know exactly where it's going to stop, but for now, they have not abolished the local DC government. What they are doing is sending in feds to basically do the job that the police in DC either refuse or are incapable of doing. So indeed, this is really happening.
So we get back to our top story. This morning, people in D.C., they're waking up to increased federal law enforcement, a presence that you can see in some parts of the city.
Yeah, and for the next week, over a dozen agencies are going to be patrolling high-traffic tourist areas and other hotspots in D.C.
Earlier this week, President Trump renewed his threat to take control, federal control of the city, and, quote, make D.C. safe again.
News 4's Joseph Romo joins us live from Union Station with more on this. Joseph, good morning to you. How's it looking out there this morning?
Hey, Tony, good morning. Good morning to Millette as well. Happy Friday. I mean, guys, what a week it has been here in D.C. We know President Trump, it's not a secret how he feels about violence in the city, and it's resulted in this. We are outside of Union Station this morning because the White House says you can now expect to see more police presence in touristy areas of D.C. In fact, there were several things announced by the White House yesterday. Check it out. For the next 7 days, and potentially longer than that, you can expect to see federal officers in marked units patrolling what the Trump administration is calling high-traffic tourist areas and other hotspots. We are not sure exactly what those hotspots are. The increase in law enforcement presence is supposed to start each night at midnight. We are talking quite a few agencies here, guys, just to name a few of them. Metro Transit Police, Amtrak Police, U.S. Capitol Police, the DEA, and the FBI. Look here, the ATF Washington office, that's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They posted this picture just before 2 a.m. this morning, showing them apparently pulling over a car along Georgia Avenue. Tony Millette, this is obviously not the first time that we have heard the president talk about Washington, D.C. as a city. By now, you know, he has threatened to take over Washington, D.C. And as we wait to see what happens there, one thing is for sure, you will definitely see an increased police presence for at least the next 7 days, guys.
Boom. So there you have it. It is indeed real. Now, there's a couple of key things to understand. First of all, as we're about to play for you, this is being called authoritarian, all these things. You can't take away self-governance from DC, but actually, as a matter of fact, we can, and I would argue from the beginning, we should have. If you, as I said in the beginning, read the Constitution, read what the Founding Fathers intended for the District of Columbia to be, it was never actually supposed to have self-governance. Okay, Muriel Bowser, the mayor, the local city council, these are all powers that were granted by Congress and the federal government after as a matter of voluntary choice. The original purpose of DC is it's not supposed to be a state. I would argue it's really kind of ridiculous. It even has electoral college votes to begin with. Why? Because it was always supposed to be, as our capital, this separate enclave that is ran entirely by the control of Congress there and the federal government. And the way I see it now is, look, okay, they wanted to give local governance to, give up some responsibilities, make it easier so that way you can have a local municipality stuff going on and all that. But here's the problem. If it is clearly the case that the self-governance of DC is not working and, the federal government has a vested interest in making sure that city not be a cesspool, then it is more than time to re-federalize DC. Fully, I would say, arguably. If you want to go the full route of constitutionality there, you can do that. But whatever it takes, right? Our nation's capital should not be a cesspool. It should not be safe. It should not be dangerous, I should say, not that it should not be safe. No, it should be the pride jewel of our civilization. And it's interesting, when I first saw this, I thought to myself, a lot of Republicans would probably look at this and say, this is a great idea. This is what we need. Liberal city is a nightmare. But no one would actually think to do this as president other than Donald Trump. And why is that? Because Trump is a New Yorker, right? He's a city man himself. He comes from there. And here's a quick point I want to make. Is that I think we as conservatives often have this mentality towards the big cities, specifically, especially a lot of the northeastern big cities that, screw them, they're cesspools, liberal nightmares, whatever, I'm going to go live in my conservative enclave and it is what it is. But it's worth noting here, guys, that I understand where that mentality comes from, but that's not the way it's supposed to be. Washington, D.C., after all, is our nation's capital, okay? And it's frankly one of the most beautiful cities on this planet. It ought to be the shining jewel, as I said, of our civilization, and it's not alone in the region, okay? Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, guys, is where the Declaration of Independence was signed. Los Angeles and New York, I don't have to say, those basically are the icons of America. When people worldwide think of America, they think of these places, which is all to say, there is no reason why we should just sit here and accept the fact that our cities are indeed these dangerous cesspools, liberal nightmares, all of these things, okay? And I understand that politics is obviously, complicated on some level. And how do you stop Zoran Mondani, for instance, for becoming mayor of a place like New York? But in this situation, where obviously you can do it. You can indeed clean up DC. You can get rid of the homeless problem. You can get rid of the crime problem. And you refuse to do it. That is a complete betrayal, I would argue, of our country as a whole, of a civilization as a whole. And guys, why is this so important? Well, I think, frankly, when you look at the state of urban decay in America for probably like the past several decades now, you can sit in, say, rural America and say, oh, that doesn't affect me. Those city people, they can, deal with their own problems. But usually, when you look at the health of a civilization, right, the leading indicator of either prosperity or decline is the state of the cities, right? I would argue that probably in the Roman Empire, if you lived in rural Italy on a farm, you probably didn't necessarily see the things happening in the beginning, but where did you notice the biggest changes? Probably a major city like Rome, right? I would argue illegal immigration is a prime example of this, because for decades, a place like Los Angeles and a lot of the bigger cities in our country were dealing with illegal migration. And, people in other places probably thought, okay, that's their problem. But what's happened since? Well, you have migrants running all over places like Springfield, Ohio, right? Entire farming towns in Nebraska taken over by this very problem. So this is all to say, guys, we should care about this stuff, whether you live in DC or not, whether you plan to visit anytime soon or not. It is all in our national interest that our nation's cities actually be nice places to be, right? They ought to be beautiful, they ought to be clean, and that's patriotism, right? Those places truly are icons of America, and they should be good icons of America. I would argue the fact that nowadays our cities look like nightmares is a greater reflection of a decline itself, right, of our civilization. So, not to get on like my little moral high horse here, but that's why I again say our capital, I think it's common sense, ought to be a beautiful place, not a terrible cesspool of a place. It architecturally is beautiful, right? Past Americans built, for instance, the Library of Congress to ensure that a young nation at the time barely had the money to do it, by the way, but they wanted to send a message to the other European nations like, hey, we've arrived. Here's kind of our form of the Imperial Palace, the Palace of Versailles, and all these things. So to think we went from that level of pride in the District of Columbia to what it is now, unacceptable. This very place you see on your screen right now, Union Station. Last time I was there was October 2024, right before the election. Quite literally, you were stepping over homeless people to be there. Obviously, not there anymore. You love to see it. So with all of that said, guys, let us now move on here to discuss the folks over at MSNBC, because you are seeing some mixed reactions in that regard. Because first of all, kind of shocking here, because Joe Scarborough likes to call out Trump on everything, but he here is actually stating that or not stating explicitly, but signaling support for Trump's plan to deploy the feds to DC, noting himself, a rare moment of honesty, that actually it is a massive problem in the city, which everyone who lives there, everyone who's been there in the past few years, of course, knows to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want a federal takeover of the Capitol. Certainly don't need the National Guard in there, or certainly not Marines. But you look at Washington, D.C., and it's been dangerous for years. There have been a couple of years here, a couple of years there, where it's been a bit better. But it's certainly over the past 5 years, it has just been an absolute mess. Its quality of life has been terrible. We've heard it from people that have gone there to visit, are horrified that the nation's capital is as dangerous as it is. We've heard it from students. We've heard it from business people. We've heard it from people that work on the Hill. I have 25, 30 years of friends asking, really, this is how the nation's capital runs? And so anything that the administration can do to forge a partnership with the city, that I got to say its leaders seem unwilling to do what is required to keep city streets safe.
Wow. So there you go. A rare moment of honesty from Joe Scarborough. I don't know what drove it. Maybe he's had personal experiences in D.C. He's being honest with himself. Frankly, everyone who lives in the district and around a district knows this is the case, okay? You can be in denial all you want, but DC is a dangerous place. And again, as I'm going to reiterate here, the conservative retreatist mindset towards our cities is not something that we should accept. I'm not telling you have to go move there or something, but we should not accept the idea in our heads that like, oh, it's okay that DC looks like this. It's okay that New York looks like this. And look, you got to start somewhere, okay? Obviously you can't federalize every city. Well, maybe you can in some ways, but we won't go there quite yet, right? Start with the capital. Start with the one you have the easiest control and jurisdiction over. And that's exactly what Trump is doing right now. However, while you even have Joe Scarborough himself admitting that, DC does have a massive crime and homelessness problem. Yeah, it has become something of a cesspool. You could rely on the fact that the colleagues over at MSNBC would not take the same angle. However, they're dealing with a little bit of a problem here because Trump genuinely, even according to Joe Scarborough, as he pointed out, does have a point here. DC is dangerous. DC has a lot of crime. So what's going to be the excuse? Well, of course, it's racism, okay? Again, they're claiming here, right? Because they basically ran out of all other options, and, maybe they can say authoritarian or something. But at the end of the day, apparently, the left is back to 2020. They've kind of done a full circle here after pretending to be a little bit more sensible for a campaign cycle or two, and now reverting back to the very same old talking points that if you want to stop crime, if you want to have safe neighborhoods and safe cities, that apparently makes you a racist. Take a listen here to that argument for yourself, and then we'll respond.
One of the things that we have seen over and over from the president, from his team, Stephen Miller saying it's like Baghdad in Ethiopia. They seem to hold their harshest criticism sometimes for cities that are majority black and brown. Do you see that, and what do you think that means?
I think that I have been dealing kind of with this issue for a number of years. It's kind of easy fodder on the campaign trail. But now we're talking about governing, and my job is to focus on making sure our city is running well, and people enjoy a great quality of life. And I think we're doing a really good job. We do need the federal government's help, as I mentioned, because they have an outsized influence on our criminal justice system. We need more prosecutors. We need more judges. There are other ways to help. Even we want to rebuild our jail, and there are ways that the feds can help with that. But also just doing their part, cutting the grass, fixing the fountains, making sure that federal law enforcement is doing all of the policing that they can do. And I just have to say thank you to MPS, FBI, ATF, who've always worked cooperatively with us, and we expect that they will again.
Okay, well, first of all, there you had DC Mayor herself, Muriel Bowser, clearly a little bit in fear, maybe, I don't know, that Trump's going to federalize DC. She's talking nice. She's saying, look, we want to work with law enforcement, all this stuff. So I don't know what's driving that aspect of it. But first of all, Muriel, let me address this. You don't need more judges or prosecutors or a bigger jail or something, as you say. See, this is always the liberal Democrat response to everything is, oh, surely we just need more funding. We need more resources. Throw more money at the problem and that'll fix it. No, what you need to do is fix your criminal justice reform operandi. It really is that simple, right? If teenagers, for instance, are committing very heinous crimes, you need to prosecute them as adults. You need to put them in prison for a long time. It's that simple. Don't let them out on the streets. Have you tried arresting and jailing the criminals? Right? Before you say, oh, we need this or that to do a better job. How about stop letting the criminals out on the streets? Same situation, by the way, in New York, LA, and a lot of other places like that. That's number one. But of course, number two, you have this MSNBC host saying, and I quote, they seem to hold their harshest criticism sometimes for cities that are majority black and brown. Do you see that, and what do you think that means? Well, Mr. MSNBC, I have a very simple proposition for you. Have you considered that's because that's where the most crime is? Like, have you considered by the way, that's also true. But have you considered that could be the reason why, right? That maybe crime is bad and we don't like having high crime rates, But of course, there you have as usual. Apparently, the argument here, as he's saying himself, basically, is if you're concerned about crime, if you don't want high crime rates, that's a racist dog whistle, as you can see clearly, right? It must be. That must be the reason why, guys. Utterly ridiculous, but that's how desperate, of course, they are to downplay this problem. They can't directly address the issue that there's, he can't directly make the argument that DC doesn't have a crime problem because it does. So now it's just like, oh, if you're trying to address or fix that, it's because you're racist. Surely. Okay. Well, in reality, I think it's a bipartisan consensus to be against crime. But nonetheless, there you have it, guys. With that said, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. What do you think of Trump's plan to federalize D.C., or at the very least now start by deploying feds to D.C.? Do you support it? Do you hope he'd go further? Like me, for instance, I fully believe D.C. should be back under federal control just in general. But let me know. Be sure to leave a like on this video, guys. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.